Good morning, everyone. How are we all feeling? Yeah. I said, how are we all feeling? Let's get some energy in this room. Yeah, that's awesome. How cool is this? We're all here together on a Saturday morning in Yarram. Can we get a round of applause just for that? Like, that's pretty great, right? Amazing. Look, I'd like to start by also paying my respects to the traditional owners of the land and to elders past, present, and emerging, and to extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in the room today. So I'd like to share a little bit about myself with you today, and I'd like to start with my family. So this is a picture of my big, loving family. This is my mum and dad who 14 years ago left everything they knew. Our 5 generations of family in South Africa, their friends, their family, their parents, their support networks, their thriving medical businesses, divided their savings by 10 in order to give us 4 kids access to a quality of life that I know in my heart I would not have been able to access in South Africa. So 14 years ago, they took a decision to immigrate to Australia. These are my 2 younger siblings, my 2 sisters, and this is my little brother who is now double my height. See, this photo was taken 10 years ago. I was 17 at the time, and it was the first time that I brought my parents into who I am. My name is Mikhara Ramsing, and I am a queer South African Indian Australian woman. Now, you can imagine my parents' expression when I told them that. When I told my parents that I was gay, I was met with a lot of fear and a lot of misunderstanding. See, my parents had never met a gay Indian person before, and the first thing they told me was that I was becoming too Australian. That being gay was something I had learnt in moving here. And I mean, to be fair, I had never met a gay Indian person before. Now, I know statistically with 1 billion Indians in the world, surely I was not going to be the only gay Indian woman in the village. But knowing something statistically and actually meeting someone you can see yourself in are 2 very different things. So maybe my parents were onto something. Maybe this was something I had learnt in moving to Australia. Maybe I had to choose between being Indian or being gay. Now, this was a pretty damaging narrative, especially as a teenager and a young person when I was working out who I wanted to be in life. And I constantly felt like I had to choose between my cultural identity and my sexual identity, like I had to choose parts of myself. The implications of that and the results of that were pretty terrifying. I remember walking around and very much feeling like a shadow of myself, like feeling like a former part of myself. And it got to a point where I knew something had to give. I was walking around in a haze, like a zombie. I wasn't enjoying life to the fullest, and I couldn't see a future for myself. So I know something had to give way. And it was in that moment, after 5 years of this suffering and this turmoil of walking around from a 17-year-old to a 22-year-old, that I realized something really important. I realized that for the last 5 years, every decision, every interaction, every conversation I had had with my parents, with myself, with my friends, on anything regarding my sexuality was being based on fear. It was fear that had kept me up at night, fear that made me cry myself to sleep, fear that kept my parents and I alienated, fear that made them say things they didn't mean, and fear that made me act in ways I didn't want to act. And I was tired of fear. I was so tired of fear. And I thought, well, something has to change. Why not try love? What if I took an action based on love every day just for myself? And suddenly, something flipped. Something switched in my head. I started to imagine, well, what could my relationships look like with my parents if this was a house of love and understanding and support? What if I could be my whole self at home? And I decided to start in a way I was comfortable. So I decided with, I'll take an action of love for myself every day. And it began with a phone call. It began with letting other people into my life. I remember being 22, picking up the phone and calling my cousin and saying, "Cuz, I think I'm gay." Only to be met with, "So what? I love you." This moment stays with me to this day because it was the first time that someone I could see myself in was showing me love and acceptance. It meant I could be Indian and gay. I then started by telling my best friend, telling my sisters, and I tried again with my parents. Now, the results weren't always positive. Although the action was being based on love, the outcomes were still coming from a place of fear. I was 22 and I was still living at home at the time because culturally, the kids in my family didn't move out of home unless it was for a job or you were getting married. So all through high school and all through university for 7 years, I lived at home. And it was pretty hard having to live in a place where you can't be your whole self, where I constantly felt like I had to hide and be in secret. But I kept showing up. I kept taking small actions based on love, to the point where I can now stand up here today, 10 years later, and say with such confidence and such pride that my heroes are my parents. My heroes are my mom and dad. And they're my heroes because they decided to take action based on love. See, my parents had a choice. I didn't have a choice. I didn't choose to be born gay or to be born female or to be born brown, but my parents did. They could choose to love their daughter as she was, as a queer South African, Indian, Australian woman, or they could not. And my parents are my heroes because they chose a course of action based on love. And it took time, but the turnaround was amazing. And you could see it. When actions were based on love, they were listening. They were really listening. This is what heroes do. They take a course of action based on love, the key words being action and love. They took a step of action of love when they decided to invite my partner and I for the first time in 2016 to celebrate Diwali together, our Indian Christmas. They took another action of love when they stopped asking me questions that made me feel uncomfortable about finding a nice Indian boy. They took another step of love when they decided to talk to my grandparents so I didn't have to have that conversation alone. This is what heroes do. And there were times when I had to be heroes for them, where I had to be my own hero and take actions based on love for myself, to correct their expectations, their language, or their assumptions. But together, we made our lives better, to be in a place where I could achieve my dream of creating a home of love and acceptance between my parents and I, because we took action, and it was action based on love. In fact, that mindset is so powerful that once I got into a good place with my family, I decided to apply it to other aspects of my life. So I took a good hard look at where my career was going. I had just spent 7 years studying a double honors degree in law and economics at the University of Queensland because that's what Indian kids do. But no, really, it was such a scapegoat of a secure place while I was going through this journey of my parents. And I was very fortunate to be able to have landed a job at a big corporate office in Sydney, started my first day as an economist, and it was lovely. The work was great, the team was great. But day by day, a little voice inside started to make me realize that I was only showing up because of fear. Fear that I was wasting my degrees if I didn't become a lawyer or an economist. Fear that I would disappoint my parents if I didn't use my degrees in a way that was prescribed. Fear about what my peers would think, what my friends were doing, what I was doing. And it wasn't good enough because I needed to take action based on love. So I had a good hard think about, well, what does my life look like if it was a day full of actions based on love? And that's when I realized, well, what I love doing is I love talking to people. I love connecting. I love problem solving. I love being accountable for positive change, to work on something directly and see its impacts. So I did the math and worked out how much money I would need to pursue what my dream day of love would look like. And that's when I realized I'd been thinking about my career on a place of fear and in the whole wrong way. I didn't need to have a dream job. I could think about what skills did I learn during my university degrees. So for example, in law, the skills of communication, negotiation; in economics, consumers, supply and demand. But more than that, I was studying 2 degrees, I was working part-time, I was being there for my siblings. What were these enterprising and people skills I was learning? And what were the skills I wanted to develop? What were my dream skill sets? This mind shift and taking actions based on love is what enabled me to save up enough money, move out of Sydney because I couldn't afford to live there without a full-time job, build a tiny home on the back of a trailer, buy a ute over Christmas, and travel for 60,000 kilometers, which is the circumference of the Earth and a half, and I haven't made it to WA yet, to work with hundreds of rural young people in communities around Australia, because that was an action based on love. I wanted to know what were young people facing, Why were our suicide rates so high in rural Australia? And how could I help? How could we take actions based on love as communities? How could we create many homes of love and acceptance between communities, between towns, between nations within the region? And this is what this mindset of love and action enabled me to do. It was employing this mindset that enabled me to leave my corporate job and head out on the road, enabled me to sit down with the Prime Minister last year and inform him of what was happening in these rural communities, to meet a NASA astronaut, to work with CEOs of billion-dollar companies, but more importantly, to work with hundreds of young Australians going through mental health issues in our rural communities. And it all started by taking an action based on love. And I wanted to give you a little taste of what that feels right now. So if you'd like to turn to the person next to you and ask them if you can give them a hug, and then give them a hug. Over to you. Give the person next to you a hug. Now give someone else a hug. What about these gentlemen on the side there? Do you guys want a hug? Come on, get in amongst it. Let's give some hugs on my right here. Now give someone else a hug. This is what heroism feels like. This is what love and action feels like. Let's keep hugging this weekend. Let's keep being heroes together. Thank you so much.